Hey friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Lawn Fawn's Yappy Birthday and the Yappy Birthday add-on. So I've stamped the images I'll be using on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm going to start with my little dog, and I wanted him to look like a golden retriever, so I'm going to use Y11, YR20, YR21, and YR23 for him. I started with the YR23, laying in some shadows down the back of his body, underneath his ear, along his haunches and the backs of his legs, and the bottom of his tail. And then I'm going to blend that out with the YR21. Then I'm going to bring in the YR20, and I'm actually going to fill him in completely. First I left a little bit of white space on his neck and chest, but I ended up going in and filling all of that in. But then I'm going to go over the area where that YR21 is with the Y11 to just warm it up a little bit. And then I did want to do a second layer with these shades. I just felt like the saturation level wasn't quite there for me. So I'm just going to repeat the exact same process that I've already done, just laying in those colors right over top of where they were previously, and that's really going to brighten them up. I'll add one more layer of that Y11 right over the highlighted area, and I also added the YR23 and the Y11 to the flame on the candle of the birthday cake. And then I'm going to move on to my next combo, which is going to be red, and I'm using R22, R24, and R29. I'm going to do the dog dish in this combo using the R29 on the outer edges and also on the inner rim where it would be cast in more shadow, and then blending toward the center with the R24 and using the R22 for a highlight. Then I'll hop around and do a few other accessory images like the bow on one of these gifts and the box of the treats. Just putting that darkest color in the corners and then blending toward the opposite corner of each of those little triangular sections with the lighter shades. I'm also going to do one of the strings on the party hat and one of the balloons in red. So for the balloon, I'm just placing the darkest down toward the bottom and then bringing that up a little bit on the left-hand side. Then I'll blend that out with the mid-tone and then just fill in the center with that highlighted shade. It's going to help it look more transparent in the center. And then I'll move on to yellow, and I'm going to use Y11, Y13, and Y15 to do the two tennis balls. So there's one separate and then one on top of the gift pile. And I did go back and add a second layer of just the darkest two shades on those to increase that saturation. I'll also do one of the strings on the party hat, and then I'll do the layers of my cake in yellow so it can be like a yellow birthday cake. And then I'm going to move on to green. I'm going to use YG03, YG05, and YG07 for my grasses. And I am doing more of a vibrant, bright green. I'm coloring to match some pattern paper that I had off to the side. I didn't tuck it under my cardstock panel like I sometimes do because I wasn't 100% sure that I was going to use the pattern paper, but I still wanted to use it as an inspiration for my color palette. But I did end up using it, so you'll see me bring that in later on. So the next combo is a bright blue, and I'm going to use B24, B26, and B29, and I'll do the little party hat, the base of that, and then I'm also going to do one of the balloons. Again, just placing that darkest color down on the bottom edge, and then using the B26 to pull that out around the rim, and then the B24 is going to be the highlight. A little bit less of a highlight on that one because it is behind the other balloons. I'll do one of the gifts, the wrapping paper of the gift in this combo as well. And then I will also do the bow on top of the treat box. So I'm just trying to spread these colors around through the various items in this little scene here so that I have a good combination of the different tones. So once I'm done with the blue, I'm going to move on to turquoise. I'm going to use BG10, BG11, and BG13. I did another string on the party hat and the candle on the cake. And I'll do another one of the gifts that is tucked behind the blue one. And then I'm going to move on to purple. And for purple, it's going to be VO4, VO5, and VO6. The purple in the pattern paper is more of a warm tone purple, so that's why I went with this combo. And I'll use that for the last balloon and also the ribbon on the little dog bone. And so I just did both of those at once since they were fairly close together. And then I just have a couple things left, all in neutral shades. So I'm going to do the dog bone using E41, E42, and E43. Use the E43 to kind of accentuate the curves of the bone and then blend it out with the lighter two shades. And I did go back and add a bit extra of that E43 to increase that depth there, and then blend it out with the E42. And then for the part where it says treats on the treat box, I'm just using the E42 and the E41 and letting that fade into the white cardstock for the highlight. And then for the frosting, I'll use E43, E44, and E47. And no, it's not chocolate because that would be bad for dogs, so it must be beef flavored. But I'm going to trim all of these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I'm going to take a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock that I've trimmed down with the largest of the small stitch rectangle stackables. And I'm going to stick that to my Waffle Flower 6x6 grip mat. And I'm going to bring in the Lawn Fawn Cloudy Stencil and some Salvage Patina Distress Oxide ink and create a cloud backdrop. But I want this to be very subtle because I'm going to go over this with another stencil, and I want the clouds to be there but not to be so dark that you're not going to be able to make out the second stencil. So I'm just using a very little amount of ink and making sure that I just blend that very softly across that panel. I'll add a little extra ink down at the bottom, and then I'll move on to my next stencil, which is going to be the Slimline Grassy Stencil. I'll line that up where I want that to go and press that into place on the sides of that grip mat. And then I'll bring in Mowed Lawn Distress Oxide ink for the top because I wanted those grasses to really be defined at the top edge. So I'll add a good bit of that ink, and then down at the bottom I'm going to bring in some Twisted Citron. And that kind of pushed a lot of the mowed lawn out of the way, so I did go back and forth with those blending tools to make sure that that was even. And then I'm going to pull off that grassy stencil. I just wiped it off first so I didn't get any ink where it didn't belong. And then I'm going to line up the top part to use it as a mask and press that back into place so that I can move on to my third stencil. And that is going to be the bunting background stencil. This is a two-part stencil, so this is just the first step. I'm lining up the stencil where I want it to go on my background and then pressing that down into place, and then I'm going to start bringing in my inks. So I'm going to do the same colors that I did my Copic coloring with. So the first shade is red, and for that I'm using some Candied Apple Distress Oxide ink, and I'm going to use a small little blending brush to add that ink so that it only goes where I want it to go. And then I'm just counting out the spaces so that I make sure that I leave room for the other shades. And then for the final row, I just picked one. I didn't want it to all be at the front for the red, so I just picked another one to start with. And then I'm going to move on to the next shade, which is going to be yellow, and I'm going to use mustard seed for that one. So I'll bring in another blending brush and just add that ink in there. And the way I'm laying it down is I'm doing an overall layer, but then I'm adding a little extra ink in the top right corner to give it just a little bit of shading. Then I'm going to move on to the next shade, which is green, and I'll go back to the mowed lawn and add that next to the yellow. I just line these up in rainbow order. So anywhere that there is a yellow banner, the next one will be green. So this one I had to count backwards to see which one I would need to do green, and it ended up being the first one. Next I'm going to do blue, and I'm going to use Blueprint Sketch. So I'll add that. And this one was very, very juicy, so it ended up laying down a little bit more ink than I was planning on. So I did have to kind of come back and wipe a little bit of it away because it just felt like there was too much there and I was afraid it would smear. We'll get to that in a second, but I'm going to move on and do the last banner in the bottom row with the Blueprint Sketch, and then the next shade is turquoise, so I went with peacock feathers, so I'll lay that in. The turquoise is going to always follow the blue, so I'll just add that. And then my last shade is purple, so I'm going to use some wilted violet for that. So I'll just add that into the one that follows the turquoise. And then you'll see that there are a couple empty ones, so I'm actually going to have to go back to my red for the one in the second row. So I'll grab that candied apple and fill that last little pennant banner in that second row in. And then the last one in the top row needs to be purple. So I just went back to that blending brush since it was only a small little piece and just blended that on without dipping into my ink. And then I'll just peel off this stencil. And it came out pretty good. You can see that there was one little kind of blob of ink that happened in the first row right under the blue. I did try to wipe it away, but you can see that it was still there. But it's fine because I knew that my sentiment was going to go up there, so I figured I would be able to cover that up later on. So I decided to just leave it. If that hadn't have worked, I would have just used a white gel pen. But I am going to move on now to the second part of the stencil, which is the line that the banners are strung on. And I'm just blending on some antique linen Distress Oxide ink for that. Now I should have covered up the little spots there because there's like some little sunbursts and I wasn't thinking, and so I just kind of blended over them. So I cleaned it up as best as I could with a baby wipe, but I ended up getting a little bit too much on the bottom one. It kind of cleaned up pretty good on the top one, but the bottom one you can still see a bit of that. So again, I removed some of that ink with the baby wipe, but I will have to cover up what's left of that later on, and it ended up working out though. Then I'm going to move on to the first part of my sentiment, and I'm going to spell out the word Yappy using Finley's ABCs. So I'm going to need the P and the Y both twice, so I'll just run those all through my die cutting machine. I'm taping those to some Lawn Fawn black licorice cardstock. There you can see all of those letters. I'll just set those aside for now. And now I'm going to pop this panel back into my MISTI. I've put my grid mat back in there so that I can stick it wherever I want it. And I'm going to line up the top part of my sentiment, those die cut letters, before I stamp the rest of it so that I can get perfect placement. So I'm just rearranging those letters in kind of a staggered line, making sure that there's the same amount from the edge of the Y to the outside edge of the background at both the front and the end there. And also making sure that that second P covers up that extra little blob of ink on the background. and then I'll just pick up those letters one by one with my EK Success reverse tweezers, and then I'll add some liquid glue to the back of those. I'm using my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue because it has that super fine nozzle to fit behind all of those letters. And I'm just making sure that they are on there nice and straight because this glue does dry very quickly. So if you need to adjust, you've got to do it right away or you won't be able to. So I'm just going to work my way back from right to left, adding on those letters. And I decided on the black licorice cardstock for those because I wanted something that would stand out against all of the colors on that background. There's quite a lot of color competing with this sentiment, so I needed to make sure that it would be nice and bold so you would be able to read it very clearly. So once I have that part of the sentiment on there, I'm going to mask off part of my stamped sentiment using a little bit of Post-it tape, and then I'll ink that up with some VersaFine Onyx Black ink. Make sure to remove that mask, and then I'll stamp down the rest of that sentiment, which is going to say birthday to you. I did want to stamp that down again, so I just put the mask back in place, inked it again, and removed it so that it would be nice and bold. So it says Yappy birthday to you. Then I'll pop my card base in my MISTI, which is Lawn Fawn Speckled Eggshell cardstock, and I'm stamping in Peacock ink. And the little dog is from the Yappy Birthday to You add-on, and then the sentiment is from the main set. And it says, have a howling good time. So now I'm ready to start assembling. I've trimmed down another piece of black licorice cardstock to be just barely larger than the background panel to give it a tiny bit of a frame to separate it a bit from the pattern paper. And the one that I'm using is from the Pipe Size Patterns Summertime 6x6, which is the brand new collection from Lawn Fawn. I trimmed that down with my paper trimmer as well so that it would be the same size as my card front, which is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 because it's an A2 standard size card. So I just made sure that that was on there securely, and then I'm going to glue the focal panel over top. I thought about popping this up on foam tape, but decided to just keep this one super flat, which is great for mailing. So I'm just gluing that down straight to the card base, and then I'm going to bring in my images. And I will start to lay those out. I need to make sure that the dog is going to be just below the end of the Y in the U part of the sentiment so that it looks like he's howling. And then I wanted to use those balloons to cover up that little bit of ink blending mishap that I had over on that right hand side. So I just made sure that everything was where I needed it to be, and then once I was happy with those first pieces, I can start gluing those down into place. I wanted the balloon strings to look like they were kind of tied to the edge of the pile of gifts. So I'm going to place those down right underneath, and then I will also glue that little dog in place since I know that he needs to go right where I had him. So I'll just line him back up there, and then I will grab his party hat and add that to the top of his head, just making sure that little dog is sitting straight, and I'll also make sure that that little party hat is straight on his head and doesn't cover up too much of his eye or his nose. Then I have the dog bowl with the birthday cake inside. I'm going to put that kind of between the little pup and the pile of gifts. And then I have a couple of clumps of grass. Those are all from the Yappy Birthday add-on, and the tennis ball, which is from the main set. So I'm just going to fill in the rest of the scene with these little bits and kind of use those to take up more of the space down below and just create a fuller looking scene. So I'll add some of those grasses overlapping some of the other elements just to kind of add a bit more interest to the scene. And I decided that that grass was a little bit too close to the ball and the other smaller grass, so I just slightly adjusted those while they were still wet. And then the last little piece I'll put down at the bottom right. And then I decided that his party hat looked too similar to the blue pennant banner, which was just behind it. So I decided to grab a white gel pen and add some polka dots to that just to give it a bit more interest and kind of separate it a bit from that banner. And then just to have it somewhere else on the card, I decided to add a pattern to the blue gift. So I'm doing some diagonal stripes, and I was going to leave it at that, but my last stripe was a little bit crooked. So I decided to try to hide that by doing a plaid pattern by doing diagonal stripes the opposite direction. And then I also filled in the little shine marks on the balloon with the white gel pen. And then I wanted to bring in a bit of glitter since this is a birthday card. So I'm going to add it to the balloons and to the bows on the gifts, and also to the flame on the birthday cake and the streamers on top of the party hat. And that is going to finish up this card, so I'll lift that up so you can see all of the detail and give you another peek at the inside. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. This is the most stencils that I have ever used on a single card, but I do love how it turned out. I think it was fun to layer those up in that way. If you enjoyed it too, please be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. I love to hear from you. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell if you want to be alerted whenever I post new videos. All of the products I use will be listed and linked for you in the description bar below in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in another video. Bye-bye!